because of the ongoing economic hardships that they're facing. Also, there was a kind of Jewish Arab. They basically are the party that support nationalization of national resources, which is gas, water, and shared public housing and healthcare. They're the only party that supports it nowadays. With the only left party that really supports it. Here we'll see a video here. This I think shows a short clip about this party from 5 years ago, but it's still relevant. It's from the Chinese network, I think.
A tight race between the right-wing Likud party, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and the center-left Zionist Union, led by Isaac Herzog. But a rising coalition of Arab parties is quickly becoming Israel's third largest political group. CCTV's Stephanie Fried has more.
Israel's Arab population makes up 20% of the country's 8 million residents. Descendants of Arabs who stayed put during Israel's 1948 War of Independence, as hundreds of thousands of others fled or were displaced, their representation in Israel's parliament has been termed a political sideshow. Until now. 4 parties have united for the March 17 election. They call themselves the Joint Arab List, and they have an unprecedented edge. Polls show they may finish third in the vote.
By banding together, Arab Party members say they're pushing back against marginalization they experience in Israeli society.
Saying they are treated like second-class citizens, members of Israel's Arab population cite unfair housing, education, and health care allocations as compared with their Jewish counterparts.
Maybe we'll have hope for a equal country. But it's too far, I think. Maybe in 10 years, maybe, but not now.
In the past, Christians have had their parties, Muslims have their parties, and now all of them, all the different Arabs from every religions are going in from the same party, and this is very, very powerful thing that give maybe more hope to make a change. And more power to make change here in the Arab society.
Guarded optimism is not surprising. During a recent nationally televised political debate, right-wing Israeli Minister Avigdor Lieberman asked Joint Arab Party List leader Ayman Odeh, "Why are you here? You're not wanted here." Odeh's calm response, "I am very much wanted in my homeland."
This is the problem. It's not just the right wing, it's the whole Israeli political culture which tolerate extremists and which tolerate hostility and violence against the Palestinians.
With unification and renewed hope, Arab sector voter turnout is predicted to rise from a traditional 55% to 70% on election day. Stephanie Fried, CCTV, Nazareth, Israel.
CCTV.
Yeah.
Okay, that was 5 years ago.
Yes,
okay.
But they still are the third largest party, and they got 15 seats.
15 seats.
And they have one Jewish member.
15 seats. How many seats?
120 out of 120, the third largest party.
Yeah.
But still, the Labour Party, or even the Center Party of the Israeli Zionist Center, refused to form a coalition with them. If they would have agreed, they would have unseated Netanyahu. They would have unseated the current prime minister. Because they didn't want to join them, then he's currently the prime minister.
That's interesting.
And then there's the remnant of those Israeli commons I was talking about. It's called it was a joint together, a former general, and it was called Meretz at the time. Now it's Yachad, or the Democratic Camp. And basically it's a more or less, I would say, a social democrat European Labour Party. They support green issues, they support some kind of social welfare. It's still very Zionist, but like for two-state solution. But they're extremely small. They have maybe, they got 3 seats out of 120. They're basically the only Jewish left wing in Israel at the moment. So only 3 seats out of 120. Everyone else is pretty much right wing or religious, and then you have the Arab Party, which in some The interesting thing is that you have some like Arab Jewish religious parties who were right wing, but they enacted social welfare programs, and that's who a lot of the Arab Jewish the Mizrahi Jews, the Arab Jews voted for. So now we're going more to recent events. Basically, what happened in 2011, there's this young woman who was living in Tel Aviv, which is Israel's cultural capital by the sea, and she basically, her rent was due, and she had to leave her place, and she could not find a decent place to rent. And she was from Ashkenazi, meaning European Jew, from like the Israeli elite. Her parents come from the Israeli elite. I think her father or mother is the head of a classical music venue in Israel. And she was trying to find a place to live affordable, and she could not find because Tel Aviv is very expensive. So she basically took moved over with a tent to the center of the square, and she made a tent there, and she started campaigning, and she had some people join her, and over time it became a very big movement. And we're going to see a video about that shortly. But the interesting thing is that this is the first time ever in Israel's history that you had a very clear social movement, which was not even a movement, it was just a massive protest. It didn't even have an ideology. It didn't have points but it was a massive protest. You had political people camping out throughout the country, complaining that the cost of living was too high, and that the rent was too high. These were the two main issues: the cost of living and housing. Basically, what happened was that a lot of people there's a lot of other socioeconomic problems in Israel. Like throughout the country, you have very poor villages, very poor cities, where people are really poor. People who live in Tel Aviv are generally better, are more well off. But what these people were saying, who come from the Israeli elite, is like, we live in Israel, we're supposed to have this Israeli dream. How come we can't afford to rent a home here for a decent price? Something is wrong. So that's why this movement was successful in coming into being, because it came from the heart of the Israeli society, from the heart of the Israeli elite. And basically what happened was, I'll show you a clip shortly, but what happened was that massive protests followed for a long period of time. But ultimately, they met with the prime minister, they met with the president, and the president and prime minister were telling them, you know how you feel, you know we care about our country, because they were basically stopping down the economy. They were bringing down the economy. They were stopping traffic. People were camping out all over the country. They were fighting with the police, and they were basically bringing the country to a halt to some degree. So what basically the government did was to put them through a guilt trip. Like, we're suffering, but it's our country, we care about you, we're going to fix everything, don't worry. And basically they were successful because eventually they decided to agree to some kind of government committee to investigate the issue, which came up with some recommendations, which were adopted a little bit. I mean, Netanyahu, what he tried to do was to create some kind of subsidized housing, but not in the city, in a different area. Yeah, exactly. And basically, and then what often happens in Israel, they found some kind of security distraction, diversion. There was some kind of conflict, and then everyone forgot about the social protest. But I still think it's an interesting one because it was very...
May I ask you something?
Yeah.
Did they ever cross their minds, these guys who are homeless, who are living in the tents and stuff, did they ever cross their minds to actually form the kibbutz, like old-fashioned way, and then go work together on some piece of land, if it's available, where they can conduct work and share the fruit of the work?
That's a very good question. Well, there are a lot of Israeli youth groups today who do that for a year or two before the military, maybe for a year or two after, and to volunteer in communities, Jewish communities.
Sure.
Some of them even Arab communities. That's from the old Zionist left, which I showed pictures of in the beginning. But they're small, they're not that big, and basically right now they see how the country is becoming more and more right-wing, more and more religious, and even Europe is becoming very right-wing, and they don't really know where they belong to anymore, where their identity is. They're very confused these days. And also they're confused because they're like trying to still be Zionists, and there's a very strong movement against Israel to boycott Israel from Europe.
I see.
So they're also torn about that.
Maybe they want to also stay close to where their mobile phones, they have a signal, so they can participate in communication, right?
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, no, they don't want that. They wanted to live in Tel Aviv because they wanted to, there's bourgeois people. They wanted to enjoy the city, and that it was basically. that's the criticism of it, that it was like a middle-class bourgeois protest of people who just want to enjoy low cost in a big city. It wasn't a real social. They weren't starving. I mean, they could live in other places.
Exactly.
But at the same time, the police was very active against it, and I'll show you a video here. Police targeting. Let's see. If it will work, I can show you the
Maybe
video.
they just handled the real protests by doing that protest.
Maybe what?
Maybe they just handled the real protest of the pupils by doing that protest.
Distracting people.
Yes. Maybe. Just saying.
But the thing is, there's a lot of criticism from people throughout the country that the core elite, who were Ashkenazi Jews who were protesting, didn't even, from people who were really oppressed, like Ethiopians or Sephardic Jews, that they didn't bother to visit them or talk to them or communicate with them. They were just doing a protest separately. So if it would have really been to vent a protest, they would allow them to get together and theoretically, perhaps.
On Saturday, Israelis organized the first demonstration of what was meant to be the resurrection of last summer's protests against the high cost of living. Last July, protest tents were set up throughout the country, and mass demonstrations reached 500,000 people in Tel Aviv. In the fall, the protests, which demanded economic reforms, stopped. On Saturday, roughly 10,000 people came out to Rabin Square in downtown Tel Aviv.
זאת יריית הפתיחה שנה שעברה והתחיל ב10,000 אני חושב בהפגנה הראשונה או פחות, וזה הגיע לחצי מיליון, אז אני מקווה שעכשיו זה יהיה משהו דומה. עכשיו התחלנו יותר.
מה המטרה של המחאה הזאת?
המטרה של המחאה מאוד מאוד מפוזרת. הביקורת העיקרית עליה שאין הנהגה ראשית ואין דרישות מסודרות, וזה משהו שבאמת צריך לעבוד עליו.
האמת שההפגנה הזאת קצת אכזבה אותי. פתחנו בעצם את הקיץ שוב עם המחאה, ואני חשבתי שהיא תהיה טיפה יותר ממוקדת, טיפה יותר עם מסרים ופחות הופעות ומוזיקה. אנחנו בסך הכל חברה מאוד אלימה, ואין לי מושג למה דווקא בנושא הזה של המחאה החברתית אנחנו נורא מאופקים, והכל פה נורא כמו הפנינג כזה.
הדבר שהכי עצוב לי שאנשים פה לא מבינים שעד שהם לא יתאחדו עם המחאה הפלסטינאית בחיים הם לא ישנו פה כלום. האנשים שדורשים צדק ושוויון הוא כל כך קטן והוא כל הזמן באיזה תשוקה לחזור הביתה לישראלי שהוא כל הזמן ממשיך להתחנף לאיזה מקום שהוא מכחיש את הפלסטיני כאילו שזה האסטרטגיה הנכונה. ביחד מחזירים את המדינה לאזרחים! מחזירים את המדינה לאזרחים! מחזירים את המדינה לאזרחים!
זה הפגנה כלכלית חברתית. אין פה... על זכויות שוות קודם כל יש דיבור, זה לא בא בסדר.
אבל לא מדברים על זכויות שוות בין יהודים ופלסטינים. At 10 p.m., some demonstrators decided to take over the streets. The police arrested people they identified as protest leaders. A crew of police media staff circled the demonstrators, filming activists who held megaphones or looked like leaders. The real news interviewed Miki Rosenfeld, spokesperson of the Israeli police.
Why were people who were doing nothing more than chanting into a megaphone targeted?
First of all, no one was targeted. I wasn't personally at the scene, so I can't comment on that.
Okay, I'll give you a perfect example. I filmed one of the people who was filming on behalf of the police came up to the chief of police and he said, this one, you see this one who's chanting in the crowd with the striped shirt? He yelled fascists at the cops.
Okay, which is a violation of the law. Okay, first the violation, as I said before, evidence can be seen and might be used. If someone broke the law, if someone attacked a police officer, if someone verbally abused a police officer at the scene and it was seen on video, then that's evidence, as I said, that can be used in order to make an arrest.
Calling the police fascists is against the law?
First of all, there's a number of different sections of incitement, and another section which is called alavat shoter, which means offending a police officer that is on duty.
It's true that there are, there are permits that are required in certain circumstances. The rules about megaphones often come into play, and it's true that there are limitations on speech when it comes to insulting public officers. However, all of that taken together still doesn't justify the majority of these particular arrests that, as you say, happen as a result of police targeting certain groups and certain types of, what are deemed to be left-wing protests. And luckily, at least at this point, the court is still there to counterbalance that attack on freedom of expression.
But calling an officer a fascist is not necessarily an insult, it's a political statement.
It's true it's a political statement, and it's true that also in many of the prior cases the issue of freedom of expression has been relevant and has come up in the course of deciding what the penalty would be. But we do have precedents of defendants being convicted or being given or